Hello, welcome to this session of FLAL, Future of Life and Longevity. We have with us Sadhvi Bhagawati Saraswati ji, who is a renowned spiritual leader and a teacher based in Rishikesh, India. She is the International Director of Paramath Niketan, one of India's largest spiritual institutions. She also serves on the UN Advisory Council on Religion and has received the Lifetime Achievement Award from US President Joe Biden. She's originally from Los Angeles and a Stanford graduate with a PhD, and she's now lived at Paramath Niketan Ashram for almost 3 decades, leading humanitarian projects and spiritual teachings. She's also a best-selling author of a book called Hollywood to the Himalayas. Sadhviji, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to this.
It's such a joy to be with you, and I'm so touched and glad to see this wonderful new project that you've taken up and this new platform and theme, because it's so critical, especially for our younger generation, but not only for the younger generation, really for everybody.
I think right off the bat, you mentioned how important it is to have a platform or such dialogues. AI is something which is on top of almost everyone's mind. And in a way, it is driving our consciousness in terms of how we use GPT tools, how we are using it for work, business, careers, our personal lives, entertainment, and so on. Given that AI is going in the direction that it is, where do you see the future of consciousness?
So, first of all, there's no place in spirituality where we reject science or reject technology. And that's really important because a lot of people think that there's this imaginary divide between science and spirituality that I don't actually think is there at all. I come from a science background. You come from a science background. And yet, here we are talking about spirituality. And I've dedicated my life, as you said, to really spiritual practices, to spiritual teachings, to living in a spiritual place. I live in an ashram at Paramath Niketan in Rishikesh on the banks of Ganga. And there's never been a place where in these last 3 decades where I have found, am I going to go the scientific way here, or am I going to go the spiritual way here? What I have found is that actually they overlap so much. They're just different ways of understanding our existence, different ways of understanding the universe, different ways of understanding our relationship to it. But there's so much more overlap than people realize. And especially when you look at, as you said, our ancient spiritual traditions, what our sages and our saints and our rishis have been giving us for thousands and thousands of years. These days, modern science is discovering things that you look at and you think, oh my God, well, that's there in our scriptures. We've known that for thousands of years. So that's an important part to begin with. With regard to AI, to me, it's just another tool. It's another technology. And yes, it is fantastically far more developed, more complex. Its abilities transcend any technology that we've ever seen. But that's really what it is. It's just another technology. And I am super excited about AI for 2 reasons. Number one, because I think it's going to remove a lot of the mundane, unnecessary tasks that people have been doing for a very long time, and to free up people's minds and time and attention to be much more creatively engaged, which I think is going to be a really great benefit to our planet. We need people who are engaged deeply, creatively. And when I say creatively, I don't mean just music and art, although that's super important as well. I mean, creative solutions to problems that we face today, whether it's violence, whether it's climate change, whether it's lack of our planet's water. So we need conscious, creative, connected, compassionate minds engaged in these issues. So if we can just hand over to AI a lot of the manual type of work that people have been doing and free up our minds for creative solutions, I think it's going to be perhaps the only way that we'll actually find ourselves out of the situation we're in. But I also love AI for another reason, which is it makes it so clear what we are and what we are not, because so many of us have identified as that which we know. Oh, I am smart because I know these things. I am worthy because I have these skills. And suddenly AI swoops in and it takes your knowledge and it takes your skills and it trumps them by God knows how many exponential aspects. And then we're left with saying, well, then who are we? And it takes us straight into the teachings of Vedanta, straight into the teachings of our scriptures, which have been telling us since the beginning of time, you are not your body. You are not your brain. You are not your actions. You're not your achievements. You are none of these things. You are divinity. You are consciousness. You are soul. And AI is really, in a way, I think, forcing that upon us because suddenly ChatGPT is able to embody almost all of that which we've always identified as. And so now we have to say, okay, so this is what artificial intelligence can do. But what's the other AI? Authentic intelligence. What is our deep, authentic spiritual intelligence tell us? And anchor ourselves more and more in that. It also shifts us into natural intelligence. Because if you look around you, you look at the trees, you look at nature, you look at the way that nature acts and reacts and lives. There's so many teachings for our lives in nature, but we've become so accustomed to turning just to technology. So I think being able to relegate that much to AI is going to be great. It'll allow us to shift into our authentic, spiritual, deep, conscious intelligence. And it will send us back into nature for what is the wisdom of nature? What's the wisdom of creation other than technology?
That is beautiful. Authentic intelligence, and so I would assume then we would refer more to the subconscious, as a lot
Sure,
of
we can.
these conscious tasks or conscious mundane activities get taken over by technology. We anyways rely more on our subconscious. So what are some of the ways then we should be able to work on our subconscious? Going
Beautiful.
forward, how can we make our subconscious more powerful, more calm, more connected?
Beautiful. It's a wonderful question. So our subconscious mind is really the storehouse for all of the patterns that run our show, whether it's our thoughts, whether it's our actions, whether it's our habits, whether it's our way of moving through the world. In Sanskrit, we say chitta, that storehouse of what we call sanskaras, or the impressions upon our psyche. Neurologically, we speak about neural networks, neural patterns. We say neurons that fire together, wire together. And it just is another way of speaking about a pattern, and a pattern that becomes unconscious, really. It's stored in the subconscious, but the pattern becomes pretty much unconscious, meaning that we move through most of our lives without being consciously aware. We say things, we do things, we act in ways that are robotic.
True.
And we speak from a spiritual perspective about this being sanskars. Oh, you know, this is what you've gotten from your past life or from earlier in this life. But
True.
what spirituality has always told us, and what neuroscience is now telling us, is so exciting, which is you can change your subconscious.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Maybe most of it was programmed in the first 7 years of your life, according to, modern psychology. Spirituality, of course, is going to take past lives into consideration. But even if we don't for the moment, and we just stick with where they both agree, where science and spirituality agree, and we say, okay, so most of it was programmed in your early life, but you are not a victim. When I was studying neurology 30 years ago, they were still saying pretty much that you only had plasticity in the brain up until the brain was fully myelinized, until those myelin sheaths on the axons had been fully complete, which happened pretty much by late adolescence, early 20s. And after that, well, there was really nothing else you could do for your brain. And therefore, if you had depression, or you had anxiety, or you had OCD, or you had so many other troubles that we know have some kind of a neurological correlate, not a cause, but a correlate, the best you can do, the only thing you can do, is take medicine to try to bring temporary balances to neurochemicals. In the last few decades, science has gotten to where spirituality has always been, which is no, the brain is completely changeable.
Absolutely.
Completely plastic. The science of neuroplasticity is one of the things that excites me so much, because whether we speak about the storehouse of our subconscious as chitta, storing our sanskaras, or we speak about it as gray and white matter, neurons, patterns, neurotransmitters, it doesn't matter. They're just different ways for speaking about the same thing. Chitta doesn't exist in the Akash somewhere. It exists in my very physical brain, which is the way that in this body I'm interacting with my consciousness. So practices like meditation, which again, for thousands of years, spiritual teachers have said, meditate. It will change your life. It will show you the truth. Now science is saying, wow, people who spend 20 minutes a day meditating, actually their brain changes. Their prefrontal cortex gets bigger. There are more neural connections. It's getting thicker. And we've got now at least many hundreds, if not probably thousands, of studies showing how meditation changes our brain, how yoga changes our brain, how being spiritual changes our brain. And so whether you go into it because your scriptures tell you to, or your guru tells you to, or you go into it because science says this is a powerful way to change your life, either way, it doesn't matter. But what we know is that our subconscious, all those times that we get angry at people, that we lose our temper, all those times that we do things that we later say, oh my God, Why did I do that? How did I speak like that? Ah, galti ho gaya. Or we say to people, oh, we say, I'm so sorry that wasn't me. Well, of course it was you. Who was it? But it was unconscious. It
True.
was the you without the conscious ability to be aware of and in control of your patterns of thought, your patterns of speech, your patterns of action. So to me, what's so exciting about the research around the subconscious is it shows us that our subconscious is actually what determines our life. We speak so much about our destiny and that which is predestined. But I always say, yes, things are predestined, but they were not all predestined thousands and thousands of years ago, somewhere in the sky, somewhere in the heavens. What you're doing right now, right here, right now, is the pre to that which is predestined for you tomorrow, next month, next year, next life. So if I'm unconscious in this moment, if my subconscious is on autopilot and it's running the show and my conscious mind is not here because I'm lost in thoughts about yesterday or tomorrow, or
True.
my mind is just all over the place, then I have no ability to consciously determine what am I going to think, say, do in this moment to create my own destiny. So working with the subconscious is probably the most important thing that we can do. It's like the steering wheel of your car. Could you imagine buying a car that the car salesman says, oh, this is the best car. You'll go 0 to 100 in 4 seconds flat. But when you look at it, you say, where's the steering wheel? And he says, oh, there's no steering wheel. Would you ever buy such a car? Of course not, because we realize that the steering wheel is going to determine where we go. I saw a sign a few years ago that said, watch your thoughts and you will see the future. Watch your thoughts and you will see the future. And I loved that sign and I've remembered it so deeply because it's exactly true. Our thoughts
True.
are what create our present experience. Am I joyful and blissful, living in that beautiful state of bliss in the moment? Or am I miserable? Am I living in rag and dvesh, this desires and aversions? Or am I living in equanimity? It's all due to my thoughts. But if I don't have any conscious awareness of my thoughts, then I have no way to control my thoughts, which means I become a victim of basically that which happened in the first 7 years of my life, the culture that I'm born into, the type of media exposure I've been exposed to. And I become just like the ball in a pinball machine where somebody else pulls it back and I spend my life, going like this, knocking into this, knocking onto that, because I have no conscious anchoring. So anchoring in our subconscious, first seeing it for what it is. What are my patterns? And then using our practices of meditation, of yoga, of swadhyay, study of the scriptures, study of the self, our practices that take us into that depth of this temporary being. Obviously on the highest, deepest level, we are just one with the divine, one with Brahman. There is no layers, there is no body mind. And yet in this human experience here on planet Earth, where we are doing our karmic duties, where we're fulfilling our karmic journey, our
Right.
subconscious mind is the steering wheel for that.
That is that is so well put, Sadhviji. As a neuroscientist, that's one of my areas. To help people understand the importance of the subconscious, and no one could have put it as beautifully as you have. Sadhviji, in your book, Hollywood to the Himalayas, you have shared very intimate and personal details about yourself, your childhood, your life struggles, and it's not easy for someone to be so vulnerable after all the work you've done in your journey. Um, how did you come about to do that? How did you become so open and vulnerable about yourself?
It's a really, really beautiful question. There's two main paths and reasons. The first is interesting because this is something that I've had, as you can imagine, a lot of people ask, because typically when we have spiritual biographies or autobiographies of spiritual leaders, especially from the West, no, sorry, especially from the East, they are typically stories of men who came out of the womb enlightened. You know, if you look at the traditions of Hinduism, of Buddhism, of so many of the Eastern traditions, and you get the beautiful, amazing, awe-inspiring biographies and autobiographies of these masters, in the vast majority of cases, they're men. And in the vast majority of cases, they pretty much came out of the womb like this. You know, from early childhood, they knew that they were meant for a spiritual path, that they were not interested in girls or sports or school or games or other sorts of things. And all they wanted to do was meditate and be spiritual. And my story is obviously not that story, aside from the fact, of course, that I'm not a man. But the way that my childhood unfolded was so different. And, you know, before I actually published this, when I was just finishing the manuscript, I had sent copies of the manuscript to several people, both in the West and also in India, people who are leaders in a lot of different fields. And by God's grace, all of them came back with really effusive praise about Hollywood to the Himalayas that really touched me and made me so happy. But it was interesting because the people from the West I had sent it to felt, yes, it's beautiful to be so open, to be so vulnerable, to be so raw, to be so honest. And from India, what I heard from a couple of different people was, are you sure? You know, there are people who love me and who were just concerned and who said, you know, you've been in India 25 years by now. You've established yourself as such a respected, renowned leader. You have impact, you have influence, you have a platform. And are you sure that you really want to share all of these stories of the way that you've struggled, your challenges, your kind of deepest, darkest secrets? Because that could make people possibly think differently about you. And the parts that they're mostly referring to, I mean, the whole book is really open and honest, not just the pre-India phase, but the also in India phase, all of that. But the part that they were really referring to mostly had to do with the fact that I was severely sexually abused in my very early childhood, and the natural emotional and psychological ramifications, the consequences that came from that, that led to depression, that led to me struggling with an eating disorder in my adolescence. And what I realized was, to me, God is perfect. And if I had not had those experiences, I certainly would never create them just for the sensational aspect of it. But since God gave me those experiences, and not only the pain and the struggle, but actually the healing and the freedom, clearly I must have been given that for a reason. When I listen to the stories of so many other spiritual leaders, and they come from families that were deeply religious, their parents, their grandparents, and their parents and their grandparents in so many cases were their first teachers, their first gurus into a spiritual world, and their culture was like that. And, mine was just in so many ways the opposite. I mean, I had great, great, great blessings. I had great privilege. I had great opportunity. There was great love, and there was struggle, and there was trauma. And growing up, I certainly knew pain, and I knew fear, and I knew longing, and I knew anger, and I knew all of these things that most people are mired in their day-to-day life. And by God's grace, I was shown a path of freedom. And I felt like, well, if I don't tell the parts of my story that are the struggles, then I'm actually part of the problem, not part of the solution. Because then what I'm doing is I'm perpetuating an idea that in order to be spiritual, you better have come out of the womb like that. In order to be spiritual, you better have never experienced jealousy or lust or greed or anger or resentment. You better never have lied. You better never have done anything wrong. Otherwise, you will be disqualified from grace. And for me, one of the greatest and most important teachings that I feel I have to offer the world as part of my dharma is that grace doesn't discriminate. That grace isn't saying, are you worthy or are you not? Did you meditate today? Did you not? But that grace is there for all of us. So that was one aspect, was just the deep commitment that I have to the perfection of the divine, and that if this is my truth, it is my truth for a perfect reason. And it is not something to be hidden or suppressed or repressed. It is something to be shared because it will be of value in the way that I have dedicated every minute of my life to service. And that experience, those experiences that I had can also be in service to so many others who are struggling and suffering. The other reason that I was so open of sharing everything is because what I noticed was I give the evening satsang each night at Paramarth Niketan after our extraordinary, blissful Ganga Arati. And Puja Swami Chidananda Saraswati ji, my guru and the head of Paramarth Niketan, had put me in this position of being the one to give the satsang starting about 15 years ago. And what I started to notice was that people would preface their questions by saying things like, well, I know that you're too pure to think like this, but, or I know you would never think like this or struggle with this, but. And you know how Indians, their bhav, their devotion is so beautiful. It's so precious. And it can sometimes put people on pedestals and keep us separate. And what I realized was that by them putting me on this pedestal, as in I was somehow qualitatively different than they are, that I was somehow cut from some different cloth, that not only wasn't that true at all, but that actually it was detrimental to their path. Because if they feel like, oh, maybe in my next life, I will also be as pure as she is, and then I'm worthy of these experiences. Well, that deprives them of the opportunity in this life to free themselves of their own pain, of their anger, of their grudges, of their false identifications. And so I really wanted people to see, hey, I know what you're struggling with. Okay, maybe I haven't lived in your exact household, but there's not that many flavors of misery and depression and pain and longing and not enoughness and yearning and divisiveness and jealousy. I mean, there's just not so many flavors of them. And even though we may each experience them in different ways, the core pain, the core struggle is the same. And I really wanted people to know, I know this struggle and I know freedom. And if I can, so can you. I was not cut from a different cloth. I am not qualitatively different in some way. I did not drop as a, virginal angel from the Stanford clouds onto Rishikesh as I realized that a lot of people were thinking I had come. And it was beautiful. And again, that's just the purity of their bhav. But it prevents them from stepping up to the plate of possibility in their life. And I really wanted people to know, if I can do it, you can do it. And you don't have to physically go from Hollywood to the Himalayas. That yatra, that journey was my life's yatra, my karmic journey, but you may be somewhere else and it doesn't matter. Because you don't have to physically go from Hollywood to the Himalayas to have that. What you need is to shift your mindset from the Hollywood way of thinking that tells us you are your body. You are its size and its shape and its color and its history and its bank account and its career, its popularity. I call it the Hollywood way of thinking, but of course it's pretty ubiquitous everywhere. Wherever you go, this is really the pervasive way that people think. And that causes suffering. It causes us to feel like we are not enough. And it causes aggression and competition and othering and violence and jealousy and anger and greed and all of these things. And the Himalayan way of thinking says you have a body, but you're not the body. You are soul. You are consciousness. Aham Brahmasmi. Tattvam Asti. I am one with existence. Thou art that. So hum. I am that. These mool mantras, you could say, these very simple and powerful few syllables remind us of who we are. We are that which doesn't change. We are soul. We are consciousness. We are divinity. We are infinite. And we take care of our bodies, right? We say sharir dek mandir hai. It's through the body that we have the possibility to experience our true self. It's through the body we have the opportunity to attain enlightenment. But we are not the body. And when we recognize that is the end of suffering, because then you realize those things happen, but they didn't happen to me. There's not one cell of my body today at 53, but even there was not one cell of my body at that time at 25 that had actually been harmed, that had actually been abused or abandoned, that struggled, that suffered. Every single cell of our bodies is constantly regenerating. And yet we hold on to the pain of the past when, if I said to you, show me Show me the one who was abused. You couldn't. Doesn't exist. Not here. Not here. The skin cells regenerate every few days. And so we realize not only has my body changed and therefore it's no longer here, the one who was harmed is no longer here, but I'm not even that body. That isn't who I am. I am untouchable. I am unchangeable. I am that, as Bhagwan Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad Gita, that cannot be burned by fire or cut by knives or wet with water or dried by the wind. And that truth is the end of suffering. And so that shift from the Hollywood way of thinking to the Himalayan way of thinking, I realized everyone can do this wherever they are. And I needed to share with them where I was stuck and how I became free so that they can realize where they are stuck and they can find freedom.
This is, this is just such an enlightened way to look at one's own past struggles, life experiences. And thank you for not just writing about it, but for sharing that perspective on why you would do that. As we bring this session to an end, I must say, Sadhviji, as our series is called The Future of Life and Longevity, I think this has been in many ways looking back, looking into our ancient knowledge and wisdom, and looking at some of the ways to think with modern tools and technology around us, and how we can combine both of these to look to the future of life. And thank you so much for that enlightening discussion.
It was so beautiful to be together, so beautiful to be with your entire community. And I look so forward to hopefully being able to welcome you to Rishikesh, to the holy banks of Mother Ganga, to Paramarth Nikatan.
Absolutely. I have visited several times in the past, but I look forward to coming again.
Wonderful.